discussion model here. So yes, Peter, I'm very interested.
So it's back to that core, listen, see, think, do. For at least for me, when I hear something that, so when it's somebody's asking a question, I may be asking a question, then and somebody provides an answer, I go through that mental process now that we've mapped it that way. And if I write it down, so whether it's Ski's question just a few minutes ago, or the phrase lateral thinking, I write it down because when I'm learning something, for me, if I don't write it down, it's gone. It's not that it's forgotten forever. It's just it's not there to follow up past the think to the do. So when you're, whether it's a course or otherwise, if you're not, to me, writing things down that are actually filling in the gaps for where you're trying to get to, in other words, they're potential answers, then it makes it harder to listen, write something down, think, see how it can fit in, and then do. And so if you go through a course and at the end of it, after this session, for me, it's a loss if I haven't written something down. Because the moment I write it down and I go back and review it, and it may not be I review it this day or next week. Last week's call, there was what was Tom's 5 points, right? And that drew me back to that and reminded me that it hasn't become a habit yet to think like that. In the 4 days after that, I actually repeated that process for myself 3 times. So actually I know it verbatim now. I didn't at the time I referenced it. So, to me, and that's why when you talked about a course book, it wasn't to write chapter and verse, but to encourage people to write down the things, the nuggets that they're hearing, because they're listening and looking, internalizing. Because lateral thinking, you need to encourage yourself or facilitate so that you actually change your course. So listen, see, think, do, but make sure whatever course you're going to, whatever discussion you're having, if there's things in there that you think, that's a little aha, write it down. Think about it, and then write the next step down, plan to do something with it at any level, whether it's small or big.
So does anyone have any thoughts for Peter? So if you all had social autism like I do, okay, it's a wonderful disability. It's the most difficult disability maybe of all disabilities on the planet. So if you guys had, social autism like I do, any idea what you would, all be saying to Peter?
You say it quicker.
Right. So socially autistic people say things faster. Why?
Well, I know you're going to teach me, so show me.
Well, the reason they say things faster is because they're not constrained by social constraints. The social rules that apply to all human beings don't apply to somebody who has social autism because they have a disability, and that is they don't care what people think about them. And so some of you may have thought this, but none of you are willing to say it. Or you may not have been, your mind, it may not have been processing, what Peter was saying, or none of you are writing it down. Like, I've written down a model. But my social autism would say to Peter, Peter, I'm clueless as to what you just said. Like, it makes no sense to me. Like, it's just, it makes no sense.
Well, some of it did make sense to me. And you asked me before how I would explain internalization of something. And when Peter said, when I see something that I actually take the time to write it down, it clicked for me, because that's the key for me. If I can hear a lot of things, I can read a lot of stuff, I can talk a lot of stuff, but at the point that I put pen to paper, especially pen to paper, and that doesn't mean that I couldn't type it, because I could probably do that too, but especially when I put it to ink on paper, then I tend to go back and really focus and internalize whatever that's on that piece of paper.
Does anyone have anything to say to Tom?
No, I'm with Tom.
So,
well,
go ahead.
I agree with both of the gentlemen. I do the same thing, and I find I get a whole lot more when I do that. So it was making sense to me what Peter was saying.
Do you think it was making sense? Do you think? Again, this is social autism, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Peter actually knew what he was saying?
I think he was speaking from his. As he was thinking, he was speaking, and it was coming from a flow of consciousness. I think.
So can somebody interpret? Can somebody interpret what Ski's saying here?
I was making it up as I go along.
Okay, that's shorter. Or Ski could say yes and no. But see, Peter and Ski both, and this is why they resonate frequency together, is because they both talk and think in similar fashion, and so they both tend to do that. But for the masses, it creates confusion. Because most are not... Go ahead.
In my experience anyway, yes and no. Because if there's a story with it that's real, that people can relate to, then they'll realize I need to do that. Because I walk away with nothing. He's walking away with something. So, there's a happy medium, and it depends on the audience, I think.
So are you all going to the leverage.dna4success.com and going to members only and then posting your one word and what it means to you? Are you guys doing that every week?
I'm not familiar with the process. Not a webpage yet.
So we could continue down this path, or like I've got Ski's solution, and I've got the science behind it. Does anybody else have Ski's solution and the science behind it, the engineering behind the clarity?
No.
So, Ski, did you want to go ahead and share your question again?
Yeah, it came from the idea that executives are, when they're laser focused on something, they're doing it to the exclusion, if I'm understanding what he said, at the exclusion of other things. And I said that...
Okay, Gart, sorry, go ahead.
That's being myopic. And I'm about to deal with an executive who I think is in that mode right now where she's very focused on something, and I need to be able to have her see something outside of what she's focused on and see how it benefits what she's trying to achieve.
So I have...
Start with what she believes in or whatever she's trying to achieve and work it back to your point. If you start with your point, you're going to lose her, I believe. If you start with her point, so now you you basically told her, hey, I understand what you're talking about. And here's the reason why I understand that. But, I wouldn't put a but. I would just say, have you thought about maybe this point, whatever it is you're trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what I basically found, and Mark, just tell me, Chef, you want to, but what I basically found is that it's the small things. I just spent 3.5 days at a international meeting. And out of 3.5 days, I came away with 2 things. One, which is so small, it's almost like, I don't know, but it hit home, and it was the market never softens for a listing agent. That just struck me as like, yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, one of the speakers was a photographer, Clayton was his name. And this guy told stories out of portraits. My God, it was the most amazing. And he had photographed every important person in entertainment and government and anywhere in the world. But it was amazing what he pulled out of a photograph. And it changed the way I look at everything.
So these types of situations happen all the time for Tom. These are not abnormal, but they are for most people. The epiphany, the aha moment, the awakening, like it changed my whole world, everything. This happens all the time to Tom. It's just normal for Tom, but it's not for most people. I wish Jacqueline was on today. So Peter introduced me to Jacqueline, and within minutes, it was insane, the connection that she and I had. Unbelievable. So I'll be eternally thankful and grateful to Peter for that introduction. I talked to her 3 times yesterday. I talked to her for an hour, and then I talked to her for a half an hour, and then I talked to her for another half an hour. It was insane. And so getting back to skis, to skis question. So I have a rule that if somebody asks a question and I can't give an answer to that question in 3 minutes or less with a diagram, a model, then I don't have deep understanding on that topic. Questions?
How do you learn how to do the modeling?
How do you what?
The modeling. You said, I can, in 3 minutes, answer a question and put a model together for it. I can kind of see things, but somewhere between the top of my head and the tip of my fingers, it's lost somewhere.
So if you get a hardbound journal, and then you go ahead and rather than write things in it, you draw pictures, even if you're not, a good artist, and then you look to nature. So what's something that, probably very few people on the planet know about you, Tom? Very few. I would be surprised if, I know it, so it's like, I don't know. So Tom loves flowers. So everybody's familiar with flowers, Tom. So when you see and you study flowers, like almost nobody on the planet studies flowers, you get visualization of different things that then you can start using models. Like Michael Radford, he's the one that came up, helped to develop engineered clarity. And he said, don't ever show people, Mark, what's on the screen right now. And I know what he's saying. But when I showed this to Jacqueline yesterday, it just absolutely, I mean, it awakened her. It just absolutely melted her. Like, it was a little boy and a little girl just hanging out, having so much fun together. It was insane. So it's practice, Tom. It's in the journal. You just use, like, look to nature. You look to common things that people have, and then you start to put those into journal, and you start to use the words and the connections, because the picture forces you to simplify things down. Does that help, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. I'll give it a try.
Yeah, and then just shoot, take a picture of it, shoot me an email, and then I can say, hey, take a look at this. So does anyone want to have the 3-minute or less version for ski?
Yes.
Yep.
So ski, what's your question again?
How do I get an executive to look outside of the focus and to see something else that relates to the solution?
So based on the model, it's asking questions. But it's not just any question. This is what Tom was referencing. It's a very strategic question. It has to be a question that's right on the edge of their consciousness. And so it can't be too far, it can't be too good of a question, it can't be too simple of a question. It's got to be a question right on the edge of their consciousness. And how do you know if you have a question right on the edge of somebody's consciousness?
They'll say that's a good question.
That's what they'll do. They'll say, that's a great, typically not good, but they might. Almost always they'll say, that's a great question. It's a reflex. It's a reflex. They don't, it's just reflex. If it's too good of a question, they won't say it because they're not in that dimension, so they don't realize you could ask like a 1 to 10 question. If somebody's at a 5, you can only ask a 5 or 6 question. If you ask a 9 question, it's a better question, but they won't realize it. And so the rule is, if somebody, the general rule is, if somebody says, that's a great question, 3 times, they'll buy anything from you, and they don't even have to know what you're selling. I've had people do that at networking at groups. I've brand new, don't know them from anybody, not introduced, just casual coins, just boom, introduced. And the guy said, that's a great question, that's a great question, that's a great question. As soon as he said that third one, he said, Mark, I have no idea what you do, but whatever you do, I want to buy it. He didn't even know the product and service. It's the highest level I've experienced in individual selling, which is insight selling. So when somebody says, that's a great question, that's a great question, if they're not saying it, it's either too simple of a question, or it's not a clear, you're not helping them to gain clarity. And so when they go ahead and when you ask them, that's a great question, and they say, that's a great question, that's a great question, what you're doing is you're moving them to, but if you give them the answer, they've got to come up, especially an executive, in my opinion, but I might be prejudiced, especially an executive, or let's just say, if somebody thinks they're really smart, and they think they've got it figured out, and they think you're not so smart, and you don't have it figured out, they're not going to take anything you're going to say. And those are often the people closest to us, our spouse, our children, friends, family, people we work with. It's why the wizard's so powerful, because nobody lives with him. So nobody has a chance to judge him. And so when you look at asking the questions, if you ask her the right questions, she will come to a consciousness and move to where you're at, and she won't even realize, that individual, he or she, won't even realize that you moved their mind. You did a mind path that shifted, so they had a mind shift. Question, Ski?
Not at this point, no.
So if somebody was really absorbing what I was saying, they would have a question. What would be that question? You know?
So, Mark, I don't know if this is a question or an observation, but when you were saying what you were saying, what it took me back to is Tom's 5 points. Because the question always to me is, well, okay, what are the questions, right? And at least it struck me that if you ask the questions in those kind of situations along the line of start with the end in mind, obstacles, what to change, is it really worth it to me, and do it, then it starts making me want to ask that person, not necessarily in the right order, but what do you need to stop doing? What do you need to do more of? And what are your biggest obstacles? Because I think if your job is to improve or facilitate improvement, those are the kind of deep questions that start making the person responsible think and open up.
So have you figured?
What do you see as the key questions?
Right.
Generic.
Right. That's the key. Like Peter's tracking this. He's tracking. He's like, so Mark, what are the questions that Ski? What are the questions that Ski should ask? Well, to make a breakthrough. To make a breakthrough, Ski's not, I don't know what those, I'm the best friend of the wizard. I'm not the wizard or God. I don't know what those questions are for that individual. But I do know that if Ski laid down a foundation, so he had a foundation upon which to build from, I do know that foundation, that level one, the level one questions in the 30-minute strategy session, that lays the foundation for being able to make a dimensional jump, to go ahead and come up with the question. So if Ski came back with those questions, answered the 8 questions, 7, now 8. If Ski came back with the answers to those questions, we as a group would be able to go ahead and tell Ski, here's the next question you need to ask. See, Peter's in pursuit of something he wants. So he's like a small child where he's going to get it. Why? Because that's just kind of who Peter is. He's like a little boy. Like Tom, he's like a little boy. Like me, I'm like a little 3-year-old boy. like when I want it, I'm going to get it. So we're going to take a short pause if you have to take off. This has been awesome. Thanks so much. If you're able to stick around for the bonus session, we'll get started in that in 5 seconds. Here we go.